On this computer. All right, we're live. Coaches coaching. Coaches coaching. This is my favorite part of the day. Right now, after this, I just go back to bed. So, just kidding. Okay, today we are talking programming. And so what we wanted to do is use actually what we're going to be using here soon in the next few weeks for our new programming. We're going to use this as the template and kind of talk through it, talk kind of the philosophy behind it. What's the thought process? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? One thing that I think about, one main thing that always comes to mind with programming is a great story I had with my dad. This was about 5 or 6 years ago. And those that know my dad, he's a gym guy, but he's more of a gym owner, not necessarily like a trainer type of person, more of like a gym owner guy. Anyways, I remember talking to him about training and coaching, and I'll never forget him saying, "Well, I mean, really, it shouldn't be that hard. You just throw some things on a board and you just go coach it, right? I mean, it's not that difficult." And I was like, okay, right? So anyways, but that's how some people view fitness and how they view programming is they just are like, okay, well, I need a lower body thing and I need something for my upper body. So I'm going to do push-ups and bench press and tricep extensions. And then I'm going to do leg press and back squats, and I'm great. I got my lower, I got my upper, I'm feeling good, right? So anyways, we want to talk about kind of what the thought process is. So let's get right into it. So if you're looking at, I want to start with the lift, but let's look at the entire program from start to finish, just an overview. So if you're looking top left-hand corner, you got the basic things: foam roll, stretch, mass drills, which is your mobility, activation, stability, dynamic warm-up, sack drills, power, and then you've got day 1, day 2, day 3 on the lift, and then you have at the very bottom, you have conditioning. So that's your basic fundamentals from start to finish. If you're looking at it across the board, you've got your movement prep at the beginning. You've got more of your power work at the beginning, and then you get into lift and then finish off with conditioning. So let's first talk that. Layne, you want to talk why we do that in the order that we do it in?
Yeah, just talk through the recipe, what it's doing for us.
Yep.
So, yeah, if you guys notice, we always follow a similar recipe: foam roll, stretch, dynamic warm-up, power, lift, conditioning, right? That's always been our recipe, but there's very specific reasons behind that, right? And we always break that into what is it doing for the tissue, okay? So if we look at foam rolling, that's improving our tissue quality, okay? We think it's really important that we spend time on movement prep. We spend time improving our tissue. So that's why we start with foam rolling. You're actually improving tissue quality, okay? Second, stretching, lengthening the tissue, okay? Then you move dynamic. There's a very specific reason when we say dynamic warm-up that we're not just simply hopping on a treadmill, hopping on a bike, do 5 minutes, get our heart rate up. And yes, we do want to increase tissue temperature for sure, but we also want the dynamic warm-up to mimic movement patterns that are going to line up with our FMS, to mimic movement patterns, line up with the lifts we're going to do as we go to do our strength training. Okay, so it's movement prep and tissue temperature as we go into dynamic warm-up. And then on our power as well, we're doing power and reactive training. I was watching a video from Boyle last week, and I loved what he talked about with power training and how, it's not just for the athlete, and how important it is that we do that for our adult clients as well, because more often than not, that power and reactive training is their bucket, right? That's something most people don't do. So it's really important, especially from a tissue quality standpoint, that their tissue can react, that it's able to do that stuff, and those benefits we get from power. And when you go into strength, we're looking at tissue, I'm trying to think what the word, tissue tensile strength, really. So, how strong is that tissue? Can it withstand, the lift? And we want to make it stronger. We want to make it bigger. And then lastly, our conditioning, that's like our tissue tolerance. How much can the tissue take? So if you look at the whole lift, and I love how Boyle always summarizes this when he talks programming, in that 1 hour of our training, we're positively affecting your tissue in at least 5 or 6 ways. And that's why we follow that, is because each thing builds on the next, and prepares your body to then perform at its best.
Perfect. So yeah, no, you talked about all the different parts of the tissue and how we're impacting the tissue, from start to finish, based on what we're doing in the workout. And now once you look at that, and we base a lot of where we're getting what we're doing off of movement patterns. You talked about FMS. We talked about that last week, as far as functional movement screen, inline lunge, hurdle step, overhead squat, all that good stuff, right? So we're looking at it in terms of movement patterns, and we're looking at it in terms of that for our lift. That's where we start, is there. So typically when we're programming, we will start with the lift first, right? Not foam rolling, not stretching, not mass drills. We're starting with the lift first, and then we're going to expand off of that, because basically what he's talking about is everything else from a standpoint, everything else is going to move into the lift, right? So if you notice, for example, let's look at, let's just take an example of reaching SLDL, right? So reaching SLDL, single leg movement, right? We need to have single leg things in our warm up as we're going through. So in that particular day, we're probably going to do leg lowers, right, to help us get ready for single leg deadlift, right? Just like last week, this looks like that, right? If I were to lie down on my back doing a leg lower, that looks the same as doing a single leg deadlift, okay? So looking at the lift, let's start with day one real quick. So looking at the lift, you can see we've got all the movement patterns from push, pull, hinge, squat, and then what we consider core corrective or carries is its own. The 3 C's are kind of in its own category, right? So if you look, you've got a push here, push-ups. You've got a pull, chin-ups. You've got a hinge, SLDL. You've got a squat, goblet squat, right? And then the 3 C's, like I mentioned, are core, conditioning, and carries, right? You've got that bear crawl, anti-rotation hold, and quarter get up to elbow, okay? So we try to include every movement in each day as much as we can, right? If you look at that across the board, day 1 to day 2, you'll also find the same thing: hinge, squat, push, pull, carry, core, corrective, right? And then day 3, same thing, right? So now if you're looking at that in relation to your warm-up, you'll notice a ton of correlation between the movements that you're doing in the warm-up and the movements that you're going to see in the lift, right? So from a lifting standpoint, we try to do a ton of supersets, trisets, working 2-3 things at a time. A lot of the reasoning behind that is using you're using different parts of your body, using different energy systems, in each one of these things, right? You're using different energy systems, different and different parts of your body, different movements between a goblet squat and half kneel chop, and compared to a bear crawl, right? So we're able to couple those things together because we are using different parts of the body. And so your lower body, as an example, is resting while your upper body and core is working in the half kneel chop. And then the bear crawl is just a beast, but it is what it is, right? So we try to couple those things together. Occasionally we will do things where we add in, where we'll do, say, like a chin up and a row in the same lift, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, for the most part, we're changing that up and working different energy systems, working different parts of the bodies, and then loading. You know, we're looking for you guys in your training to put emphasis on certain parts of the lift, right? You might have some people that we need to get after it in goblet squats, and some people that they really need to work on their bear crawl. So where's the emphasis going to be for the client when you're training them in that group? Where's their emphasis going to be? Where's your emphasis going to be when working with them? Layne, you want to talk about anything else on that? Any other comments?
No, I think you covered it really good, honestly. Important stuff.
Okay. So the next thing, looking at, staying on the lift for a second, if I'm looking at sets and reps, what you want to think about from the aspect of training is, if I'm loading them up, I want it to be where the last 2 or 3 reps are pretty challenging, where I'm having a hard time finishing. And I'm not saying they're not able to finish. I'm saying it's a challenge to finish that lift, right? So if I go to goblet squat, for example, and it's 2 sets of 8, okay, I want to make it to where on that 7th to 8th rep, it's a challenge to get out of that goblet squat, right? If they're able to easily just boom, 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 right, in their 8 reps, well, then we miss the boat on that, right? So we want to make sure that we're challenging them within this rep scheme. We don't get too caught up in rep schemes, sets and rep schemes. We will stick kind of with the 2, 3, maybe 4 sets, anywhere between 5 and 15 reps. That's going to be kind of where we're at, depending on what we're doing. But if we're in the lower rep range, 5 or 6, we're loading them up. You're in the higher rep range, 15, you're not loading them up as much, right? So it just depends on what we're doing. But we don't get too caught up in that periodization and all that good stuff. Basically, we live by the 5-pound rule, right? Basically, what the 5-pound rule says is, if I come do a goblet squat, I do 2 sets of 8. It's a challenge. It was a good set. Then next week when I come back, I'm going to add 5 pounds, right? So that's the 5-pound rule. Okay, and that's on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say one thing on that, because I think that's something a lot of people get hung up on, and that's like remembering who your audience is, right? And 95% of the people we're working with, okay, linear periodization is going to be very, very effective for them. Like RJ is saying, you just add 5 pounds, you just add 2.5 pounds. That's going to take you a very, very, very long ways. So that's why, like he's saying, we're not getting too hung up on reps and sets, because if you're just following that simple linear periodization, you'll get a lot of mileage out of that before you need to really think too much farther than that. And then from there, if you're just, and the program's going to do this for you, but from there, if you're alternating periods of intensity and periods of volume, there you go. You're done. Periodization done. It's going to be effective.
Yep. So, so with that said, guys, on the lift, yeah. So you can see as you go through the progression. So we are going to be trying moving forward. We've been doing a 4-week. We will be trying a 6-week. And you can see, so week 1, week 2, that's your rep scheme. Week 3, week 4, that's your set rep scheme. Week 5, 6, that's your set rep scheme. Okay. So anything else on the lift from a general standpoint? I think that pretty much kind of covers it, huh?
Yeah, I think it covers it pretty good.
From big rock standpoint. Okay, so now guys, looking at foam roll, stretch, dynamic warm up, sack drills, power drills. So let's kind of start left to right, left, and we'll move right. So with foam roll, we're just kind of putting big rocks on there. Ideally, we're spending anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes in a foam roll. If that's the case, you're going to get more than 3 things. But what we're saying is, hey, for this particular lift, we recommend these 3 things. You want to make sure you're getting foam rolled, right? And you can see, as an example, foam roll, we have calves on there day 1. Well, one reason we have calves on there is because they're going to be doing goblet squat. Well, why is that relevant? Because a lot of the times people have issues in their goblet squat because they have a lack of ankle mobility. Well, how do you overcome ankle mobility? You roll out their calf. That's one way. There's other ways, but that's one way, right? So you can see we're looking at from the start, looking through the entire lift, right? Calves, goblet squat, boom. Okay, you can see the stretch. We're typically doing 2 things in the stretch. We're doing high ticket, high value stretches, high bang for the buck, ones that we can, hold for 45 seconds and get quite a bit done. In a Spider-Man, you're working, hip flexor, you're opening up the hip on the opposite side. You can work T-spine mobility, so there's a lot of bang for your buck. 90-90, you got the front and back, another bang for your buck type of drill. On the mass drills, so with mass drills, what we typically recommend is we're giving you essentially a menu of mass drills based off of what we're trying to correct. Okay. And one thing I wanted to point out, since it was made such a big deal to me, was is why we have it as mass drills. So Layne, would you like to explain that for a second?
Yeah, I can do that. So So the reason we have it MAS is just we wanted to make sure we were communicating the order in which those things are going to happen, right? So mobility first, right? We're going to stretch first. Activation, right? We're going to do our correctives and activations second. And then stability third, right? So like if you think about it, okay, I'm going to do, Spider-Man stretch, mobility, 90-90 stretch, mobility, right? Activation. I'm going to do like my T-spine sprinkler drill stretch and my leg lowers and some Cook hip lifts. Boom, activation. And then stability, that's going to be part of that activation and stability. And then moving into the dynamic warm-up. So we just wanted to make sure that was clear as far as order of operations, why it's called mass drills and not, maybe something better like SAM drills or something.
Great. So yeah, and he's correct. I put SAM drills because I didn't think it was that big of a deal, and I thought SAM sounded better than mass, and these guys all lost their shit and said, no, it needs to be mass because mobility comes first, and they're right. They're right. I was just looking from a simplicity standpoint, and they were right. So with that being said, you can see, once again, like he said, we're working mobility, activation, stability, but these are based off of movement patterns we are trying to correct, right? So if I've got a T-spine mobility issue, well, that is going to be, these are going to be the things that you need to do for your T-spine mobility, right? RJ, same with ASLR, squat pattern, hip pattern, yeah.
Do you want to use like the round 1 goblet squat too of an example on how these are like such a great idea?
Correlated, yeah. So if you can see down here, bottom left-hand corner, goblet squat, and then you can see underneath 1A, 3A, 3B, 3C. Okay, so what those letters and numbers correlate to is they correlate to correctives for the goblet squat. So as an example, if I'm doing a goblet squat and I can see that they're having a hard time in the bottom part of their squat, right? They're having a difficult time being able to stay down there. Well, then you can see 3B, squat pattern, 3B, goblet hold, right? So this is a corrective for goblet squat, right? Same thing here, inline chop, right? If I can see that someone is struggling with inline chop, I can go and look 5B, trunk 5B, bird dog holds. Right, so you can see that there's correlations between what we're doing in the lift. So if you can see that there's something off, you can go look to your mass drills, make a little note, circle it, and come back to that when you go to do your mass drills the next time you train and go, hey, here's what I want you to do for your mass drills today. You're going to do bird dog holds. Here, go. Boom. Pretty awesome. So anyway, so moving on from there, you've got day 1, day 2, day 3, dynamic warm-up. We kind of talked through this is that, right? So, you know, we're trying to raise the tissue temperature. We're trying to get them in multiple planes of movement. We're trying to mimic things that they will be doing in the lift. If we've got a lot of single leg stuff, we'll do a lot of things like marching, skipping, single leg skips, you know, those sort of things. If we're moving laterally, we'll move laterally. You know, you notice in day 2, there's some lateral movement in day 2 with reaching lateral squats and lateral barrel crawls and things of that nature. So in the warm up, there's a little bit more lateral that we're doing in day 2 than we're doing in day 1. Right. From there, guys, we've added in the sack drills. That's one thing we're gonna do with sack drills. It's pretty quick, only 2 minutes. You're just working on 1 or 2 things. Just kind of getting their feet moving. You know, nothing too intense. We're not spending 20 minutes on it. We're spending 2 minutes on it. And then you're going into the power. You notice on this power, what we're looking at from a power standpoint is, you know, power is essentially core and power, right? You've got to have a strong core and you've got to be able to move quickly. That's essentially what power is, right? And so you can see here, we've intermingled some core work within our power work. So you've got tall kneeling chest pass, plank, box jumps, right? So we're getting that jump and that throw, right? But we're also getting a core in there for the bracing aspect, because that's a huge part of power work is being able to brace to be able to throw. The example I typically give is if you were to take a lacrosse stick, right? So if I had, let me get standing here. So let's pretend for a moment that I'm holding a lacrosse stick, right? My remote control is my lacrosse stick, right? So the stick's out here and I'm throwing, right? Well, if I tried to do this same thing with a string, so let's pretend that at the end of this, it's not a stick. So imagine, right, lacrosse throw, I'm throwing the ball with the stick, right? You imagine how much power and force comes from that, right? Well, imagine that I'm trying to do that now with a string, right? And I'm trying to use the string to be able to throw the ball, right? It's not a rod, it's not strong, it doesn't have a strong core, right? Throwing that ball is going to be very difficult and very challenging, right? Because I don't have that stick to be able to move the ball. That's essentially what you're thinking. My core is that stick that's helping to rotate off of and move off. Am I making sense? Or am I sounding crazy?
No, you're nailing it. What's his name? Dan John and who's the guy with Exos? I'm trying to remember. Verstegen.
Yeah, Verstegen.
He used a very similar example and talked about posting and how that core strength is how you transfer energy. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to transfer energy and you're at risk for injury and you're not going to be an effective mover.
Gotcha. Okay, so you can see, so we've intermingled the core with the power work, and then going through the conditioning, what we did is we gave 5, 8, and 10-minute options. Biggest reason for that is because conditioning for us in the training setting is kind of a secondary thing. We can do a lot of people can do a lot of their conditioning on their own, or they can go to classes like Ignite to be able to do their conditioning. With conditioning, we're doing a lot of interval work, right? So this is, in our opinion, conditioning in some aspects, it should be last, it should be towards the end, and it should be if you have time available to do it. We try to do conditioning 90% of the time. There's going to be times when you don't, but it's not as in in our opinion, it's not a huge ticket item, primarily because some of those things can get done on their own. The one benefit to doing it with us is we can gamify it a little bit, have some fun with it, make it a fun environment, and help teach them about the importance of interval training versus just steady state cardio and conditioning. Right, we're working a lot of work to rest ratios, 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-1.5, meaning that if I'm working, you can see in this 5-minute scenario, I'm on for 30 seconds, I'm off for 1 minute, I'm doing 3 sets. That's a 1-to-2 ratio work to rest, right? You can see this next one, sled march, 30 on, 30 off, 8 of them, that's a 1-to-1. Okay? And that's what we're working off of, is those intervals in the conditioning part of it. Okay. Any questions? Did we cover everything?
I think we covered everything.
I think we did. All right. Well, that will go ahead and conclude this Coaches Coaching.
Yeah.
Coaches Coaching.